Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com, or of course, follow us on Instagram at filmmaker_u. Every week, we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this week I'm joined by cinematographer Kira Kelly, whose work includes Why the Last Man, Insecure, and more recently, Echo. Just to name a few. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you.
I'd love to know how you got involved with Echo on the Marvel universe.
Yeah, so Syndey Freeland, who is the director of Echo, she had a movie that is called Rez Ball. And so we were going to, I met for that and ended up getting a job with her, and like we hit it off really well. And we ended up going to New Mexico to start prep. However, we didn't know that we would only be there for about a week because the film takes place, it takes place on a Navajo reservation. And
Mhm.
this was during the time, this was in 2021. And at that point, the Delta variant was coming up pretty strong. And the Navajo Nation was like, no, we can't allow, like they got hit really hard. And
Mhm.
so the idea of opening up to an entire film crew and who knows what everything that we're bringing in and all that stuff just wasn't going to work for them, so understandably.
Mhm.
So that kind of that fell through, that we stop. We ended up pushing, and then in the time, like a couple weeks afterwards, Sydney was like, well, I've got this meeting for this Marvel show, would you be interested? And I was like, okay, sure. And so yeah, she got Echo, and then I went and interviewed for it, and it was a great fit, not only with Sydney but the other creatives there at Marvel. And so that's how it ended up happening. And what's funny is that we ended up shooting Rez Ball after Echo, so we ended up going back and shooting that last spring, 2023. So it all ended up working out, which is great.
I've been a camera person for 30 years and I fell in love with cinema. I heard there was free film school in France and I wanted to get into the French film school. I really didn't know anything at the time, but I knew at least how to take pictures. So I said, I'll try for the image department. And then when I miraculously got into the French film school, I fell in love with working with the camera. You're following what's going to be in the movie. So that immediacy that the camera allows is what I loved from the beginning. I'm Kirsten Johnson, and this is my course about documentary cinematography.
Well, it's to think of like it's such a different story. Like one's about,
Yeah.
like basically overcoming, racism and what have you, and the other one is like this big Marvel, universe piece, right?
Yeah. Well, I
Um,
think with Rez Ball, it's so interesting because with Sydney, it's like, she used to play basketball and she grew up on the reservation, like less than an hour away from where we shot. So it was definitely like a personal sort of story. But then it was also like with Echo, it's also like this just totally different. Like this was a Choctaw Nation and a different Native American, like a story to be told. And I don't know, both were so amazing, and both I learned so much from both of them, like just culturally in general, which was really a amazing thing that we get to, immerse ourselves in and learn from job to job. So
well, and you got to work on the pilot, which is so important because it sets the foundation for the whole series and
yeah.
the look. So, what were some of the challenges that you guys encountered to figure out how you wanted this to look?
Well, I mean, it was interesting. I remember when I was going into it, I thought like, okay, I'm sure, this is Marvel. There's going to be some big meeting about somebody coming in and telling me how everything has to look and what it should be and all this stuff. And it just never happened. Like they were so open and like really gave us so much creative freedom. And, Sydney and I were really like, Sydney's biggest point was that she wanted it to feel like this is a grounded story. Like we're not going to space, we're going to be in New York and Oklahoma. And yes, we have these really fun moments where we get into like ancestral moments when we can go like at the beginning of time and things like that, or like this when we go into like 1200 AD before there's any air pollution, all this stuff. Like we were able to really sort of play with those things visually, but for the most part it was a really grounded story. And something that Sydney and I spent a long time with in prep was like, since Since Maya is a deaf character, so much of her communication obviously is going to be ASL. And so we wanted to, traditionally in filmmaking, like, this is a close-up, right? This is where you go into and like to feel emotion and get characters, what their feelings, not only in their face, but like what they're saying. And but we quickly realized that we did a bunch of tests that like this doesn't work with ASL, because so much of ASL is the hands, and it's so much of your facial expression. So we even tried things where we would start like a close-up, we would start tilting down on the hands and then come up to the face, but it just never worked, because like you need both at the same time. So we spent a bunch of time in testing trying to figure out what our version of a close-up was, and we found that it was mainly like a bit of a wider lens that was a little bit closer, so we could still leave room for the signing but still like feel ourselves like in that character's world. So that was a big part of it, of like just trying to figure out what that meant, and figuring out the visual language of the show.
Well, I'd love to talk to you about the oneer in the first episode, because it's
Yeah.
pretty crazy. Because at
Yes.
one point I was like, wait, oh, it's cut there. And then I was like, wait, I don't think it did. And I had to like go back and rewatch part of it. So I'm wondering if you can sort of tell us, like, how did you guys plan for this and set it up?
Yeah.
It's not just like following a person through it. It's heavy fighting from room to room, and
Yeah.
it's
Well,
pretty crazy.
from the beginning, Syndey was really clear, like she wanted this fight scene to be a oneer. So we started looking at like a different, oneer fights and all that stuff. And, obviously like Atomic Blonde came in as like a huge reference, because, we all love that movie. And, but I will say, like for Syndey, it was not enough just to shoot like, okay, yeah, let's shoot this cool fight sequence and blah, blah, blah. Like she needed it to be a cool oneer, but that also furthered the story. Like when you look at that scene, like Maya comes, she starts it, she's like, she's a teenager who's acting out a lot, but she's still like, you can give her a little bit of grace. But by the end of that, like 2 or 3 minutes or something, you see this character completely transform into a villain. Like she has killed somebody, and now she liked it, and now she's like facing off against like Daredevil and like all this stuff. And so it's like, it was not enough that it just be a cool oneer for Syndey. It was like, we need to see this character change and like have serious character development happen. And so that's kind of that's daunting, right? Like we're trying to figure out how to, yes, technically do something that's difficult as far as like planning out, it was multiple, like there was first unit at play, there was second unit at stunts and all this stuff, like all these different units kind of come together seamlessly, looking without seamlessly with the cuts as possible. And then, but still make sure that every single person who's part of the fight scene is making sure that that emotion is still there. Like we see her become this villain. And so it's like for Syndey, it's like that moment we went through in rehearsals, not only with stunts, but with Alakwa, that moment where she's like got the guy in like this headlock, and like we push in on her eyes, and like the only audio you hear are like these two different heartbeats, and then they kind of sink into one heartbeat, and then there's just one heartbeat, like she kills him in that moment. That was the purpose of the fight. And so that's what I was like, my favorite part of that whole sequence, and doing it with Syndey, like I said, was like all the technical stuff was so cool and so fun to play with, but also just making sure each time of like, okay, are we telling the story? And it's like, and that was the big challenge of it. But that was, I mean, that whole sequence, like I said, it was something where multiple days, multiple units, and like a lot to plan. And luckily I had a really amazing second unit DP, Nico Aguilar, who was amazing. Like I made up all the like lighting plans and figuring out where we want sources, and we also figured out where the cuts would be. And then Nico and his team just did a great job of like, when it wasn't us and Alakwa, like making sure that everything else with the stunts worked out. And it was really, it was fun. It was a fun experience.
And like you said, in terms of story, like the first, I don't know how long in, maybe 30 seconds to a minute or whatever,
Yeah.
she's not in the fight. She's walking the
Watching.
door.
Yeah.
And then the guy who she ends up killing sort of comes at her. And that's when she
Yeah.
sort of starts to change and go on. How much effects were in there? Like I think about Daredevil and like his like stick with the thing.
Yeah.
Like, were some of those things CG'd, or what was there any effects in there?
I mean, yeah, I think that it's safe to assume that there are effects in it. That, you know, but it's one of those things where we still wanted to try to make it as much like our stunts guys were amazing, and like, you know, they're what they're doing in their physicality is not effects. Like they are really getting thrown around. And yeah, like, definitely there are effects. Obviously there are cuts. But yeah, for the most part, it was just trying to keep it as like whole as possible. So yeah,
Well,
I can't tell you exactly where the effects are.
Yeah.
Or the
It's trade
cuts,
secret.
but yes.
Well, the other thing I noticed is like there's like the dark room where she sort of stands outside and moves in.
Yeah.
But then when she comes out to fight Daredevil, we're in a room, and up along the top it's like a massive set of windows.
Yeah.
I mean, so we have these two different lighting sources.
Yeah.
How did you balance that to make everything sort of feel cohesive?
So basically, you know, we had out the window, we had 360s and we had S60s. And so everything out there was we were able to control on the board. And the same as like the overhead lighting, that was all Asterotubes that we were, you know, like put in fluorescent housing, sorry. So what we were able to do is like a really big part of it was the dimmer board operator, like with a monitor, and like, okay, at this point, when the camera comes around here, let's take out the lights behind them. And this point, okay, let's bring up this just one side. So it is a dance, not only between like the steady cam, the stunts, the dimmer board op, everybody really kind of has a piece. The focus puller has a piece of this, which just makes it even more like hard to try to get it all in one, you know, in one bit of it. But yeah, so I had all these. Originally the fight was supposed to be at night, but then it came out like with just how story was, it was going to be dawn. And so I really wanted to play with this idea of like the sun just breaking, you know, above some buildings, or like a little bit of highlight. So I was able to put like a little bit of that hotter point on the left side. And also I really wanted, like, when we're in the smaller room, when, you know, when we turn around and look up and we see Daredevil, I really wanted him to be silhouetted. Like it was one of this thing of like, you know, he's been watching in the shadows, like that's his thing, like the whole night. And so I really wanted this first moment of like, oh shit, it's Daredevil, to be like this sort of like graphic comic imagery. And so we went with like heavy backlight there. And then we played into some of that sort of silhouette movements with their like fight once we get into the bigger room. So yeah, it was just trying to like, you know, I find myself, I'm kind of a comic nerd. I love them. I feel like it's one of those things where, you know, I did that show, Y the Last Man, which was based on a graphic novel, that I have every single one of them. And somehow like it was one of my favorite comics from the beginning. And so it's like one of those things where you get to work on shows like this. It's not to say that, you know, we don't take the images from the comics as literal, but you can definitely have them as inspiration. I did that a lot with Y the Last Man. We did that a lot with Echo, like just Kingpin alone. Like he's given such cool like imagery within the comics, whether or not it's silhouettes or just how big and imposing he is. And so we really sort of, I always like to look at that, just like, okay, not necessarily how you can copy it, but how can you get that same sort of feeling? And with Daredevil, it was really fun to play with, like, okay, this silhouette of like this, like, you know, this man from the shadows. And so, yeah, it's fun to have. It's a rich resource.
Now, as a fan of comics, is there a comic series or book that you're like, I really hope this gets made into a movie or a TV show that you would want to be a part of?
That was Y the Last Man. I really
Okay,
like.
so that was your like. So
Like I said, I have all of them, and I remember ever since the beginning, like there was talks of that show happening for forever. At one point, it's like Tom Cruise was attached to it, and it was just like I always told my agents like, "What's happening with Y? What's happening with Y?" And the fact that I ended up getting it, and then like, getting it to do the pilot on that and all that stuff was really so gratifying. And it was just one of those things where you're just like, "Okay, this is it." So yeah, that was definitely the show for me.
One last question about the that long oneer.
Yeah.
How much time was put aside for practicing and doing, because you said it's like a dance, so it's almost like, how much time did you guys get to practice versus how much it took to shoot?
Well, it's one of those things where, so, you know, Syndey sat down with Mark Skizak, who was our our stunt coordinator and actually second unit director for that sequence. And so they sat down and really sort of looked at like where the wonder would be. And we all talked about what, where the camera would be at those points. And then, the stunt people, they go into their cardboard box world and they start like mapping it out and throwing themselves into things, and really had like a great plan. And then they would show us the stunt viz, which, we would all, look at and make comments on, and we would edit and things like that. And then once we started feeling the space, the production designer, Chris Trujillo, who's amazing, kind of set out this space that would work not only with camera positions, but also where the stunt people needed, things and breakaways to be. And then we started rehearsing it in the space, and really being able to like walk through it and, figure out which parts Alakwa would do and which parts her, her stunt woman would do, and like kind of break it down from there. And so we just knew the way of handling it. And like I said, I was, able, Syndey and I were able to be there for all the Alakwa scenes. And so I think it was I forget exactly how it happened, but we were able to be there like the first day of shooting when we established all this stuff with her. And then the stunts kind of like, we had to go off and shoot other stuff. And then the stunts and second unit with Nico came in and shot all the other things that kind of weave together. And then obviously VFX comes in and helps that weaving to come together even more. But it's crazy. I think the sequence was, I'm probably gonna get this wrong, but it was like 3 to 4 days, I think, at least. And then it's like, and of course, like I said, like different units and all this stuff. And then through the edit and VFX, you kind of get everything to fit together again. But I think I'm super proud of it, because I feel like it's one of those scenes where you really do have to look for it. And I feel like everybody who touched it did a great job, and like really sort of made it that centerpiece of that first episode.
Probably one of the smartest things I've ever done for my career. It gave me all the tools that I needed to be able to jump into a new career.
Getting myself into a mindset, thinking like an editor, and being around people that I can talk to on that level was really invaluable to me.
A lot of the things that I learned from that class, I still think about.
I loved the classroom. I loved the computer stations. We built a sense of community.
And it also instills a lot of confidence in you to take that and go out into the world.
After I took the class, I felt very prepared to take the next step.
I owe Manhattan Workshop the career that I have right now.
Things have been going great, and I really have the Manhattan Workshop to thank for that.
So one of the things that I find really interesting with this series is because Kingpin comes in and, because she's lost her brother and she essentially wants
Father.
revenge. He comes in, sorry. She wants to, or he sort of acts like a father figure in a weird way. But he's also, that slowly he becomes more and more, reveals, I guess you could just say, more and more his being evil. And I'm wondering, like, how did you guys approach lighting his character, and how did it change over the series?
I feel like it's one of those things with Kingpin. We wanted to, like, again, it's kind of tipping your hat to the comics that came about and all of his imagery. And then also he had this really cool eye injury that he got in Hawkeye. And so it was like one of these things of playing with like trying, and also like his, because of the suit that Vincent has to wear and because of the bald head, Kingpin is very, he's round. He's a round figure. So trying to figure out, like, for me, it was fun just to play with like, okay, how can we get some real shape here and really sort of like have some fall off. And so it's like, I did a lot of either, very side lighting with him, or very toppy that we could end up like shaping a little bit. So for Kingpin, it was a little bit, a little bit more directional, and definitely less fill, and a little like, so we can really get some of that fall off in the shadows and like longer, deeper shadows. And then, but when we were in the kitchen, like for example, when he is at the top of episode 4, when he comes back, it's just trying to give enough detail to see the eye injury and everything that happens in there without like, you don't want to like show it all. It's like leave a little bit to the imagination. And so what's fun about like, especially like that, this is in episode 4, like basically you kind of show their relationship from him being like this uncle figure. And like I really do to this, I believe that Kingpin really does care about Maya. There's like some sick sort of love that happens there, but they're both like, there is like a control that has to happen. And ultimately he cares about his own you know, himself more than anybody. So then that kind of answers all the questions. But we really wanted to play with, like, for that whole sequence. You know, I remember when I first got the script for 4, I was nervous. I was like, oh my God, this is all so much happening, you know, seated at a dinner table and then just talking. And I was like, how are we going to, blah, 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 how are we going to do this? But then as soon as we got to set and really just saw how Vincent and Alakwa like connected together and how they, you know, how they kind of brought these characters to life, it was one of my favorite things, because it was just like the two of them like doing this power dance around each other. And so we really kind of played with the flashbacks to New York, like the New York dinners, and how they felt different than maybe the tension that happened at the table when he's finally, you know, in her family kitchen in Oklahoma, and really just kind of play with how we can tease this tension. And so yeah, it was a fun way to get those scenes and kind of get those two actors together and really give them room to spar a bit.
How did you guys work with the colorist? Because, you know, cinematographers now, it's like their right-hand man is their colorist, because they have to finish. So like, what is your process with the colorist? Like, how did you guys work on this project?
So for the MCU, for the Marvel TV side, we work with one colorist there named Matt Watson, and Matt is just incredible. Like, I don't know how he like does every show there, and I don't know how he does it in such a like a great timely manner, but then also just super creative, and like he is able to really make good distinctions between different shows and different looks and all that stuff. And so when I started, I knew that, like, you know, I wanted to sit with him and create the LUT. There was a LUT that I liked that I've used for a long time, but I really wanted to, I knew that there was going to be a lot of night sequences in the show. And I knew that obviously it was going to be a very VFX heavy show. So I wanted to protect myself in a way. And so what I did was I created with Matt this LUT that was like, really at this point, like there were some points when we do night exteriors, I was like, why did I do this myself? Because it was such a dark LUT, because I really wanted to, how I like to do night is like, I still like to have night to have like a softer quality. So instead of just like, you know, I don't like looks at night for myself, like when it's just like a hard edge and everything falls off into crunchiness. I really like a lot more softness in my shadows. And so because I was shooting with such a heavy LUT that had so much, basically we were, you know, overexposing it all, but like, you know, it was like the LUT was printing it down. So we had so much great detail in the shadows when we ended up in doing the final color that we were able to like bring them up a little bit and have it not be so crunchy. So that was great with Matt, of like, you know, I'm thinking about like, you know, the scenes in the pilot when she comes back and like first time she drives back into her family home, and it's just like, you know, you really kind of see into the shadows, which is nice for me. So Matt helped me create that LUT for that. And then, you know, it's great, like, you know, we had a good amount of time in post to be able to sit and really figure out what the look was, and, you know, and he was just a great sounding board. So yeah, we worked really closely, and he's just super talented, and really grateful I got to work with him.
I have one last question for you. What would you say is your favorite guilty pleasure film or TV show to watch?
So I guess I've said it before, I was like a little bit of a comic nerd. I was so excited when X-Men 97 came out, like, which is, again, it's a Marvel show, but it's like so good. And it made me go back to like the original X-Men's, which, you know, just kind of, now it's been like, I just finished a movie that I was shooting in New Mexico this past spring. And you know, at night when I'm getting home and just like trying to work on the next days, just like, you know, making sure the next day's shot list works before I email it out to the crew and everything, I would just kind of have X-Men, like the old one, on in the background. And it's so soothing.
Yeah.
You just look up and like Storm and Rogue are kicking ass, and you're like, okay, it's still going here. But it is a big, yeah, it's a guilty pleasure in that, like, you know, it's fun, it's nostalgia, but you can still kind of do other things while you watch.
I will say, I don't want to ruin it for anyone who's watching, but I will just say Gambit is my favorite character.
Oh.
So
Episode 5.
I know.
Oh my God. Poor Rogue.
My friend was like a week or two ahead of me, and he's like, oh, Lord, episode 5. I was like, what?
Yeah.
So,
It's rough. Yeah. But
well,
yeah, it's fun to go back to the old ones too.
Yeah.
Like, they're definitely not as polished, but still super fun, like the originals. But yeah.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's
And
great
that's it
talking
for
to
our
you.
show this week, everyone. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com. Of course, follow us on Instagram at filmmaker_u. I'm Gordon Merkel. Thanks for watching.